Thank you, Damien, for the generous introduction. It's been an absolute pleasure learning from you this past year, and yours is going to be a hard act to follow. I feel really privileged that I'll have you on one side of me and Dr. Sharon Lambert, where are you, Sharon, on the other side of me in 2026. And many of you might know this is PSI's 55th conference. We've got 550 delegates here this week. So thank you, all of you, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. You might notice, guys, it's standing room only here. And importantly, I'd really like to acknowledge all of our PSI staff. We've got Lisa, Yadra, Susan, Lucy, Marianne, Karen, Kennedy, Marina, Dayden. Sorry, I feel like I'm always the wrong height for these things. And we've also got Bernadette, Claire, Dayden. And just in case anyone hasn't heard our really exciting news, we also have a brand new executive director, Dr. Orly McCall. Yay. So all of us here on council, we really know that our entire organization would not be able to run without this incredibly organized team behind us. And once again, PSI staff have pulled off another exceptionally streamlined, professional, efficient operation. So thank you really sincerely for holding us all together. We would never be able to do this without you. I also want to welcome all the exhibitors, the sponsors, and particularly Constellation Healthcare, who are the main sponsors here this year. Now, you can't imagine my extraordinary surprise as I stand here before all of you today. I really only joined PSI when my friend and past president, Dr. Ann Kyo, cajoled me into it. At the time, I was heavily involved in another organization, the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science. And having spent some time in the States, I was also a member of the APA. So I didn't really have much more time or space for joining any more organizations. But of course, Anne regularly listened to me complaining about the sports services and mental health service in Irish schools and the mental health service here. Those of you who know me might know that I've got some pretty strong opinions on lots of things. And not only that, I tend to be pretty vocal about a lot of things. And one of the things Anne said was, maybe you should do something about all these things that you're talking about all of the time. And she said, maybe some of the things that you should do, maybe you might want to join the PSI. Later she said, maybe you want to run for council. Later she suggested presidency. So when I came to that first conference, I heard Mark Smith quoting Theodore Roosevelt. This was Mark's presidential address. He was talking about how it's not the critic who counts. Here I am, a critic. But it's the man in the ring whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, spending himself on great devotions and worthy causes. That really resonated with me, because I am often that critic. But that's because I believe that people are worth fighting for. So when I point out that something is wrong, that's because I want it to change. And I don't mind being the one asking those awkward questions. I don't mind doing the work. I don't mind fighting for what I believe is right. And Mark went on to speak openly and honestly about wounded healers and about finding our place And all of this work that PSI was doing, I was also really inspired when Ian O'Grady was giving his presidential citations to Vicky Phelan and Catherine Corliss, naming these women as outstanding members of Irish society. And these were women I was really, really inspired by. These women were fighters. I suddenly realized, actually, for all my complaining and criticizing, I had no idea what PSI had been up to. And maybe I should make some space for this organization, who clearly had values that were really aligned with my own. And I was already juggling, directing 2 clinics, 3 children, 1 really scruffy, difficult husband. But having watched Vincent, Anne, Oren, and more recently Damien on this job, I'm aware that it's a really enormous undertaking. And particularly after working so closely with Damien the last couple of years, I'm under no illusions about how much time and energy a job like this requires. I want to give a shout out to my own staff, that they are under no illusions about just how grumpy and demanding I can be. I'm sorry, I can only promise more. But when I take on a job, I do not do it by halves. I don't know how. Mitchell Fleming might be the only person in history to ever do this job twice. I don't really know what that says about Mitchell Fleming. But I do know that all of PSI should be incredibly grateful for his wisdom, integrity, guidance, and diplomacy, as I am. There's almost nothing about psychology in Ireland that Mitchell Fleming doesn't know. And there are others, like Margaret McGinley, for example, who've been working tirelessly for so long that I don't really know that anyone can ever remember a time when the likes of Mitchell and Margaret weren't here to tell us, how do we do a thing around here? We have one founding member, Karina Garvey, who's still among us. In fact, PSI started in Karina's kitchen in 1969. We've come a long way from Karina Garvey's kitchen to our brand new bricks and mortar home in Smithfield. So I asked myself, is this place for me? I mean, I've always had these questions about belonging. Is PSI my home? I'm 50 years old now, but I feel like I've lived a million lives. My family have moved so many times from house to house, county to county, country to country. I come from a long line of people who have emigrated, people who've suffered, people who've never really known where we belong. Yet somehow we've found our way by getting in the ring, fighting for our place. Many of the people in my family have never had the opportunities, the privilege of having their voices listened to the way you're honoring me today by listening to mine. My mother's parents emigrated to Chicago via Ellis Island. My grandfather from Roscommon, my grandmother from Leitrim. They never knew each other at home, came from very poor, deeply religious farming backgrounds. And like many Irish immigrants in Chicago, they met at an Irish dance hall. My grandmother journeyed through terrible hardships, trauma, poverty, the loss of a sister in childhood. When my grandmother was emigrating, a young woman needed a local priest to write a letter confirming they were of good character. Unfortunately, my grandmother had to walk many, many miles and several parishes away before she could find a priest that wasn't requiring a particular kind of payment in return for that letter of good character. At another point, my grandfather's brother died by suicide. My grandfather became so unwell in his distress that he required an inpatient stay in a psychiatric ward. My grandmother was judged very harshly for bringing him there at that time. And nobody really understood the mental health distress that he was going through. And he received really good care. He served as the bodyguard to the mayor of the city of Chicago for almost his entire career. But things would have been very different for him if my grandmother had not insisted that he received that support. My own parents later met at another one of these Irish dances. Those must have been a hell of a good time. My father was a recent Irish immigrant, fresh off the boat from Kerry. My grandparents could not have been happier that my mother was marrying someone from home. My mother was only 19. She later acknowledged she only got married to get out of the house. It was the 60s, and her family were Irish Catholics from the south side of Chicago. There were only two ways that a young Irish Catholic woman moved out of her house in those days: dead or married. And rightly or wrongly, she needed to get out of the house. So she got married very quickly and had 5 children of her own. Apparently, that was freedom. But moving out to the north side of Chicago as a newlywed was not exactly far enough away from her mother. So as soon as my father suggested returning home to Ireland, they bought tickets for the luxury liner, the QE2, just like the one on the Titanic. And on board we got. I was a newborn. Apparently the journey included the finest of everything. I wish I could remember. But it was important to my father that he return home in style, because he was the 13th of 14 children, and he had grown up in extreme poverty. And as a child, they had suffered terribly because of his father's alcoholism, gambling, and violence. He never talked or complained about any of that. I heard those stories from my mother, but I would never, ever begrudge my father 1 ounce of luxury, because my God, that man worked for every single thing that he got. Growing up in County Meath, we had a huge amount of freedom. We wandered around Newgrange, the Hill of Tara, and Trimcastle like they belonged only to us. When my mother decided to go to university, it was decided that I should go to play school. I only went for 1 day. I was accused of some terrible, unthinkable crimes, which naturally I had not committed. But I never went back to that place again, and instead I happily accompanied my mother to her lectures in Maynooth. I even quietly took notes for her in philosophy, sociology, and literature. Because at the age of 4, I was already reading and writing fluently, and this seemed much more interesting to me than play school anyway. It was the mid-70s. Nobody ever suggested that I might be autistic, but as I look back at hundreds of stories about my early childhood, it surprises me that nobody ever really asked about all the unusual things that happened during those days. I did get in trouble quite a lot. I never slept. I barely ate. To this day, I am really grateful that my parents fully accepted me for exactly who I was. They often took my side, and they were really sympathetic to my feelings and my ways of being. They were so far ahead of their time, I still can't wrap my head around it. They really helped me to navigate things in really practical ways. They were gold dust in a difficult world for an awkward kid like me. The Irish economy took a very bad turn in the 80s. Our family lost everything. Penniless, we moved back to Chicago as the banks had taken everything. It was a far cry from the luxury of the QE2. The bitter irony of it all was that we moved from a 7-bedroom house to a 1-bedroom apartment with 7 people sharing it. Masking, though I didn't know the term then, helped me to pretend that we weren't poor, to pretend that everything was fine, to pretend that I wasn't dying of homesickness, a broken heart, shame. All of us struggled badly during that time due to bullying, social dynamics that I didn't understand, financial pressures. Just to put a little icing on the cake, my parents got divorced. There were some silver linings. that every time I took standardized tests at school, my parents received some letters from the state about my results. It seems I was being recruited for some bigger and better things. What those bigger and better things were, I don't really know, but I received an academic scholarship to a college prep school downtown Chicago. I'd received lots of other offers from other schools. This one, St. Ignatius, was the best. In many ways, the school was really just like what you see in the movie. Kids were being given convertibles for their Sweet 16s. I understand others here had a Sweet 16 the other night. Congratulations, guys. I hope Damien gave you a convertible. But this school was the making of me. I learned about service to humanity. I learned that this world wasn't just for me or about me or my narrow little version of reality. In fact, while I was part of this world, there was a much broader vista where I could contribute to things that were really important. My work, my studies, my life, they mattered. Here I'd been feeling so sorry for myself, privately, secretly nursing my homesickness, was pretending outwardly everything was fine. Then I stepped into the inner city where our school did all these urban projects. Oh my God, the trauma of the inner city. Some of the things these kids had seen make your toes curl. What a sheltered life I'd been living. So I studied hard. I don't mean to shock you, I was not a cool kid. I don't know if you can tell. But I made a lot of friends, really good, true friends. Friends you keep your whole life. I made the honor roll every semester. And when I finished, I was offered a full scholarship to Loyola University Chicago. And I knew the first week, my very first semester, psychology was for me. Even with a full academic scholarship, there was still rent to pay, books to buy. I worked full time. Sometimes I worked 80 hours a week between babysitting, right off campus, working in the library. Right after my lectures, worked in a nightclub till 4 a.m. at the weekends. I didn't sleep. That wasn't new for me. I also applied to the Peace Corps. I got accepted to a place in Peru where I was all set to work as a guidance counselor for troubled teens. This would springboard me to a full scholarship for a PhD in clinical, counseling, educational psychology, whatever I wanted by the end of my 2 years volunteering. I spent my final undergraduate year in Rome, then traveled all over Europe and the Middle East for another 8 months, only returning home for a couple of weeks before I was supposed to go to Peru. But I never made it to Peru, because when I got back to Chicago, my grandmother was unwell. She asked me not to leave. And I'd been gone for a long time. So just like that, classic ADHD, I canceled Peru, stayed in Chicago, bought an Irish pub with my brother and a close childhood friend. We named the pub on Shanachie, and I learned a lot about human behavior that year. You have to when you run a pub in Chicago, and some of your clientele may or may not include the mafia. I also fell in love, got pregnant. Before I knew it, I was moving home. Moving to Ireland with my partner, another Kerryman. But let me tell you something that shocked me to no end. When I moved home to Ireland, I discovered that somehow I did not fit in there either. And after longing for home for so many years, not only was I not being welcomed with open arms, I was not safe either. So when I say that it is a surprise to be standing here before you at the tender age of 50, it's because at 25 I found myself in a really dangerous situation. And in many ways, history was repeating itself. The kind of childhood my father never complained about was suddenly my reality too. alcoholism, gambling, violence. So I packed up my tiny baby and I ran. I spent some time learning about addiction, hiding my shame, until I remembered or realized this is not my shame to hide. I even did a 2-year course on addiction. I thought for a while maybe I'd be an addiction counselor. And while all that learning was really healing for me, I realized in those early days I probably don't yet have the space or the level of forgiveness for me to be really helpful to other people experiencing addiction. This is not my addiction. So instead I took a job with Kerry Education Services and worked under the supervision of a clinical psychologist in NEPS. This was an old route into educational psychology that doesn't exist anymore, but it was very lucky for me that it did. Before I knew it, I was working as an educational psychologist. Can I tell you, I loved that job more than anything. I was traveling all around Cork and Kerry, these remote little schools, these pockets of communities that hadn't seen a psychologist for many, many years, if ever. I had these 2 really wonderful supervisors. They really mentored me. If I'm honest, they probably acted as my psychologist too. But either they were too polite to say it, or somehow they didn't know. The bulk of my job involved assessments, lots and lots and lots of assessments. I was hired to provide cover for areas that had no cover, and to clear a massive backlog of assessments in schools in underserved areas. But eventually I decided I wanted to do more than just assessment, and I was surprised. We weren't doing much intervention. So I decided I really needed to just do my PhD, design some effective interventions. Eventually landed on Maynooth, did a PhD. Professor Brian Roach did a lot of work on IQ, cognition, relational frame theory. I developed SMART training, did several years of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, developed magpies for neurodivergent children's mental health. I'm summarizing that really quickly. That's more than 20 years of work. That was 2 sentences. You're welcome. I could have really bored you there. I didn't initially know that most of my caseload were neurodivergent. That's because they've generally been the kind of neurodivergent that gets missed or not supported, because they aren't that squeaky wheel. They just don't quite fit neatly into a DSM category, or they fall between the stools with the way our teams are set up. And I've listened to the parents of these children for more than 20 years now, and their stories amaze me. As all of you well know, we need to listen much more carefully to parents, because nobody knows a child better than their own parents, or oftentimes the way a child knows themselves. Yet when I hear so many parents describing the way their experiences are in school systems or in primary care or CAMS or even in disability, a lot of people are really feeling unheard. And of course, we're all completely aware of how poorly resourced and overstretched our services are. My goodness, we know this. We're all doing our best. We started this conference, myself, Anne, Katarina, with a workshop on burnout, because we do need to put our own life jackets on first. But it's really hard. It's really hard. We need to figure this out, how we can better collaborate with the families we're supporting. Because there's this entire cohort that we're entirely missing. And guess what? Then they're growing up. And they're not coping. And there's a price to pay. And it's an economic cost to bear for the state in terms of adults who are not coping. They're likely to be incarcerated or unemployed. They might require addiction services. They're much less likely to complete school, much more likely to have poor mental health, much more likely to die by suicide. the list of additional financial costs, it goes on and on and on. I've just received a sign that says my time's up, even though I'm not even halfway done. It's the story of my life. We're not adequately resourcing the neurodivergent community across a lifespan. Not only is it very expensive, people are dying. There is no shortcut in sight. I'm going to fast forward almost all of my speech, I'm sorry, but I will talk to you all about a lot of this stuff later. 50 years, at the tender age of 50, it suddenly dawned on me, time is not magical, that we need to slow down. I won't slow down too much because I know we've got another speaker, don't worry. This poor man had to wait a lot yesterday too. Good Lord, he's never coming back to PSI. In fact, he's gonna put us all in jail right after this. Or lock us all up some way. But it seems to me like just yesterday, not 25 years ago, that I had a tiny boy on my hips. And we were in a much different position. I couldn't be more proud that when I opened my eyes, that boy is a man. And he's earned himself a first-class honors degree in law. And our lives could be very different, but they're not. Instead, we're here. And for all my years of running instead of walking, being up half the night, PSI is going to benefit from the fact that I never learned how to sleep. But I want us to think carefully right now, because we risk making a lot of mistakes. You know, we have this bid for inclusion, but we've reduced people to, these narrow versions of things, just their grades or just their IQs scores or like just one mental health condition. Like, let us look at our services. A person is not just their age or just a physical health status. Human beings aren't built like that. We're far more nuanced and heterogeneous. Heterogeneity is not an inconvenience. I repeat, heterogeneity is not an inconvenience. So we need timely, sensitive, specific assessment, followed by appropriate education and therapeutic support services. So please tell me that we are aware that we can do better, and that we will not simply pour some oil on the squeakiest wheel, and only if their mother has some money and shouts a lot. Because I'm sorry to tell you, we're in a very broken system, and it will take time to change. And we have just been trying for many years to squash humans into spaces that weren't built for them. That was never going to work, and we need to stop. This change is coming to psychology in Ireland, whether we like it or not. In fact, it's coming to psychology everywhere. That's not just because of Koru, it's part of it. Thanks, Mitchell, for all your help. It's coming because it has to come. And as I look at the kinds of changes that our system needs to make, I'm looking at systems far and wide and what has worked and what hasn't, and will make the most sense for all of us. And when we come together at these conferences and we listen to the research that our young researchers and clinicians, and when all of us listen to each other and our own voices, like quietly, what is it that we need? Like, what is it that our hearts want as we're listening to our clients? That stuff is really important, because in a lot of ways I think we already know what is needed. So I'm not going to, I know we've got people here like Suzanne Guerin that have really guided us, and people with me on the Professional Conduct Committee like Garrett McDermott and Ethne Longport. I've really been grateful to them. we've got a lot of people. I think we spend a lot of time with like public practice versus private practice. I would prefer if we could work together like allies instead of fighting with each other. I would love if we could all continue to elevate each other and elevate the work of our students and our young trainees, our APs. I happen to have some of the most extraordinary ones. In case you've noticed, should you ever hire one, you will be very, very lucky. Take one on your team. Let us future-proof psychology. Investment doesn't just mean money, it means mentorship, cultivating these young, brilliant scientist practitioners by boosting each other up rather than taking each other down. Our organization has done some of the most incredible work over the last couple of years. Some of the papers, Sharon Lambert, I'm looking at you. Some of the position papers we put into the Oireachtas, Louise Higgins, Lorraine Madden, Damien, the work we've been doing on disability. We've had some unprecedented collaboration with our other professional bodies. The work with the autism protocol, Marie Boylson in psychiatry has been a true friend. Michael Drum and I are almost finished. We really are, it's true, with the ADHD practice guidelines. And let me tell you, it is a breath of fresh air to work with somebody like Michael Drum, who clearly cares about the people he serves. One other thing, and then I really will let you go, but the sexual harassment working group has done really stellar work over the last couple of years. And with Jura McNamara and Rebecca Nolan's work, I think that's really important. And I also think that we do a lot of like calling out of the stuff we're really uncomfortable with, and I think that's really, really important. But I also think it's really important that we remember to also notice the allies among us, because it's not just about pointing out, oh, there's a bad guy, but it's also, here are my friends and allies here too. Because we also have a lot of really good guys here, sitting quietly beside us, afraid to say something. So let's remember that our allies are here too. And so we now, thanks to our property working group, PSI has a home, a real physical home. And for me, as a person that has never really known what home is like, this is important. And the landscape of psychology in Ireland, it's changing. And across the world, psychology is changing. And we will be ready. We'll be ready for this. So me, a farmer's daughter, like having something solid under my feet, that's important. And you, our members, like, this is a membership organization, and your opinion matters. Like, what is it that you want from your organization? We want for this organization to be you, to be about you, to be what you want it to be. And together, we will have a home for you. Together we will build the rest. The poet Mary Oliver asks this question: what is it that you intend to do with this one wild and beautiful life? I intend to do this right here. I intend to serve, and it will be my most extraordinary honor to serve you. Thank you.